The sound that shattered the stillness of my anniversary evening wasn't a loud one. It was the soft, insistent vibration of my phone skittering across the kitchen countertop, a frantic, metallic dance against the granite. I had just put the last of the dinner plates into the dishwasher. The air was still warm and fragrant with the ghost of the rosemary and garlic from the roast chicken Michael had made, a small, perfect celebration for just the three of us. My daughter Lily's crayon masterpiece, a vibrant, lopsided portrait of our family, all sunshine and stick-figure smiles, was taped to the refrigerator, a beacon of my other life, my real life. I looked at the screen. Not a text, not a call from a friend. It was the specific, urgent alert from the hospital's staffing system, reserved for critical, unforeseen shortages. A trauma alert. Multiple casualties incoming. The ICU was activating its emergency surge protocol. My name was at the top of the call list. A heavy weariness, older than my years, settled in my bones. It was a familiar feeling, this sudden tearing of the fabric of my domestic peace. I looked at my hands, still damp from the soapy water, and at the simple platinum band on my left ring finger. For one long, selfish moment, I wanted to be deaf to that summons. I wanted to stay in the warm, yellow light of my kitchen, to slice the anniversary cake with the pink roses on it that Lily had helped pick out, to listen to her recount her dreams in the morning. Michael was already moving. He had been watching me, reading the subtle shift in my posture, the way my shoulders tensed a fraction of a second before I even registered the sound. He came up behind me, his hands, broad and capable from a lifetime of wrestling with live wires and complex blueprints, coming to rest gently on my shoulders. He didn't sigh. He didn't say, "Again?" He simply leaned his forehead against the back of my head, his breath warm in my hair. "Go," he murmured, his voice a low, steady rumble that was my anchor in every storm. "We'll be here. The cake will keep. Lily will be thrilled to have a leftover breakfast." He turned me around, his eyes meeting mine. They were the color of rich soil after a rain, and in them, I saw no resentment, only a deep, unwavering understanding. He knew the rhythm of my life, the dual pull of my heart. He had signed up for all of it, the cancelled dates, the lonely nights, the woman who sometimes came home with the shadows of other people's tragedies clinging to her like a chill. "Just drive safe, Sarah. Call me when you know anything." I kissed him, a quick, hard press of gratitude and love, and then I was moving, the warm, soft woman of the kitchen receding as the other Sarah, the one made of sterner stuff, began to assemble herself piece by piece. I changed into a fresh set of scrubs in the bedroom, the soft, worn cotton a second skin. I glanced at Lily, sleeping soundly, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. She was the reason for the walls I built, the reason I had to be strong, the reason I had to come back whole every single time. The drive to the hospital was a silent, solitary procession through the sleeping town. I left the radio off. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, the whisper of the tires on asphalt, and the frantic, rhythmic thumping of my own heart. A trauma alert at this hour meant chaos. It meant violence, accident, life irrevocably broken in the blink of an eye. I began my ritual, the mental and emotional preparation that was as vital as any surgical scrub. I visualized building a wall, brick by solid brick, around the soft, vulnerable core of me. Behind that wall was Sarah, the wife, the mother. In front of it was Sarah, the ICU nurse. The wall had to be high and strong enough to keep the horror from seeping in, to allow me to function, to think, to act with clarity amidst the storm. I pushed through the heavy, swinging doors of the intensive care unit, and the familiar world of controlled crisis enveloped me. The air was a unique, sterile cocktail of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, underlying metallic scent of blood. It was cold, a deliberate, clinical cold meant to keep germs and emotions at bay. Monitors beeped and whined their discordant symphonies, each tone a language I was fluent in, the steady ping of stability, the frantic chirp of a rising heart rate, the relentless, single-toned shriek of a life in freefall. Liam, our charge nurse, a man with the tired eyes of a veteran and the calm demeanor of a mountain, saw me and the tension in his jaw eased just a fraction. "Sarah. Thank God. We're getting slammed. Multi-vehicle pileup on the I-90. We're taking the worst of the lot. I need you to take the lead in Bay 3. He thrust a tablet into my hands, his fingers flying across the screen to pull up a patient chart. His voice dropped, taking on a graver tone. "It's a VIP, actually. Dr. Arthur Pendleton. He was on the surgical floor for a minor elective procedure. Developed sudden tachycardia and hypotension an hour ago. They thought they had it managed, but he just crashed. Hard. They're coding him now. The name, at first, was just Data Pendleton. It was a name like any other on a chart. Then, it landed, a delayed reaction, a depth charge exploding in the quiet waters of my memory. Dr. Arthur Pendleton. The name was a ghost, a specter from a past I had worked hard to outgrow. It carried with it the chill of a specific, cutting humiliation. A memory, vivid and unwelcome, flooded my mind, so potent it felt like a time slip. I was 25 again, drowning in a sea of sequins and self-importance at the hospital's annual charity gala. I was on the arm of David, a surgical resident whose ambition was a bright, burning star I had mistaken for passion. My dress was a simple black sheath I'd saved for months to buy, but in that room, under the glittering chandeliers, it felt like a costume, a poor imitation of the effortless elegance around me. David, glowing with pride and Pinot Noir, had pointed a discreet finger across the crowded ballroom. "That's him," he'd whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. "Dr. Arthur Pendleton. Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. He's not just a doctor, he's an institution. If I can get a fellowship with him, my career is made." I saw him then. A tall, silver-haired man holding court, an island of absolute authority in the swirling social sea. He had a way of standing, of listening, that made everyone around him seem like a supplicant. Later, David, emboldened by the occasion and the champagne, had steered me through the crowd for an introduction. "Dr. Pendleton, sir, it's an honor. I'm David Forrester, a second-year resident. This is my girlfriend, Sarah." The great man's eyes, a cool, assessing blue, flickered over me. They didn't linger, didn't engage. They simply categorized and dismissed. He offered a thin, perfunctory smile that never reached his eyes. "Ah, the nurse," he'd said, his tone implying he had just solved a simple, uninteresting puzzle. "Good man. Always keep a good nurse on your arm. They make the endless hours so much more tolerable." Then, he performed the act that was more insulting than any words. He turned his back to me completely, his focus pivoting exclusively to David. He clapped my boyfriend on the shoulder, leaning in with a conspiratorial chuckle meant only for David's ears. I stood there, frozen, a prop in my own life. I heard his next words, clear as crystal, each one a small, precise incision. "Just remember, David, they're just nurses. Don't let them think they run the place. Know their place, and you'll go far." The words, "just a nurse," hung in the air between David and me for the rest of the evening, an invisible, poisonous fog. He was too dazzled, too eager to absorb the wisdom of his idol, to even notice the wound they had inflicted. When I tried to talk about it later, my voice trembling with hurt and anger, he had looked genuinely baffled. "Sarah, he wasn't talking about you, specifically. That's just how he is. He's a legend. You have to have a thick skin in this business. But he was talking about me. He was reducing my entire calling, my chosen life's work, my very identity, to a supporting role, a convenience, a stepping stone on his own path to greatness. That night was the first major crack in the foundation of our relationship, a fissure that would eventually widen into a chasm we could not cross. The memory was shattered by the frantic rush of a gurney being wheeled into Bay 3, surrounded by a swarm of anxious personnel from the surgical floor. On it lay Arthur Pendleton. But it wasn't the imposing, arrogant figure from my memory. This was a pale, shrunken effigy of a man. His famous, imperious jaw was slack, his skin the color of damp ash. An oxygen mask was strapped to his face, fogging with shallow, insufficient breaths. The EKG lead snaked across his bare chest, the screen above him showing a heart rate that was a frantic, erratic scramble, a bird beating itself against the bars of its cage. He was just a man. A complex, failing piece of machinery. Liam's voice was tight, a wire about to snap. "He's all yours, Sarah. They're losing him. BP is 70/40 and dropping. We've got to get ahead of this." The professional in me, the part that had been drilled and honed over 15 years, took immediate and absolute control. The personal history, the old, festering humiliation, was instantly compartmentalized, shoved into a locked box in the deepest corner of my mind. This was not about my past. This was a patient. My patient. Let's get him on our monitor. I need a full set of vitals, stat. Get me a full history, all his home meds, the details of the procedure, the anesthesia record, everything, I directed, my voice calm but firm, a conductor readying the orchestra. My hands were already moving, a blur of efficient motion, connecting him to our more sophisticated monitors, starting a new, larger-bore 4-line in his antecubital vein with a swift, practiced ease that belied the storm of memory raging inside me. I was in the middle of my assessment, checking his pupils, sluggish, his lung sounds, clear but shallow, the cool, clammy texture of his skin, when the monitor let out its piercing, single-toned shriek, the sound that stops every heart in an ICU. The chaotic, futile scramble of his heart rhythm dissolved into a flat, unwavering, accusatory green line. Code Blue, Bay 3. Code Blue, Bay 3. Liam's voice boomed, and the room transformed. The quiet tension erupted into a well-rehearsed, high-stakes nightmare. The code team poured in, a surge of focused energy. The junior resident, a Dr. Moss, young and with hands that still looked too clean for this work, started chest compressions, his technique earnest but already showing signs of fatigue. The anesthesiologist was at the head of the bed, battling to secure a definitive airway. Orders were being shouted into the chaotic air. Epinephrine, 1 milligram. Charge the defibrillator to 200 joules. Clear. I took my place at the bedside, my world narrowing to the small, terrible space between my hands and his sternum. I've got compressions, I announced, my voice cutting through the noise with an authority that was born of countless repetitions. I placed my palms, one over the other, locked my elbows, and leaned in, putting the full weight of my body into the first downward thrust. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first compression was met with that sickening, unmistakable crunch of cartilage. It was a sound that never, ever got easier, a brutal, intimate violation of the body that was always, paradoxically, necessary. It was the sound of life being forcibly demanded back from the void. 30 compressions. A brief pause for a breath from the bag valve mask. Then again. My back and shoulders began to burn with a familiar, righteous fire. I focused on the rhythm, a metronome of pure will against the silent, patient tide of death. I looked at his face, so close to mine that I could see the individual pores on his nose, the faint, broken capillaries on his cheeks. This was the man whose words had been a splinter in my soul for over a decade. His casual dismissal had fueled a quiet, burning determination in me. It had driven me to become not just a nurse, but an exceptional one. To get my CCRN, to specialize in the most demanding of environments, to become the nurse other nurses came to with their most puzzling cases, their deepest fears. And here I was, my own hands, the hands of the woman he had deemed just a nurse, fighting for the very beat of his heart. The irony was so profound it was almost a physical taste in my mouth, metallic and sharp, like old blood. They shocked him. His body jolted on the bed, a grotesque, lifeless dance. The flat line on the monitor stubbornly refused to change, a green testament to our failure. Nothing, Dr. Moss breathed, despair cracking his young voice. We're not getting him back. We've been at this for 10 minutes. Second round of epinephrine is in, someone else called out. No electrical change. No pulse. I kept up my compressions, a machine of flesh and bone and sheer, stubborn will. But my mind, detached by the sheer physical repetition of the act, was drifting, untethered from the crisis. The rhythmic pounding was a drumbeat that carried me back through the years, past the gala, past nursing school, all the way back to the very beginning, to the origins of the calling that had now placed me here, in this impossible, pivotal moment. It all started with the slow, quiet fading of my grandmother, Alara. She was the sun around which our family orbited. Her hands were always busy, kneading dough for bread, stitching a loose button, tracing the words in a storybook as she read to me. She was the keeper of our history, the teller of our tales. When I was 9, the first threads of her began to unravel. It started small, a forgotten name, a misplaced set of keys. We laughed it off at first, called it senior moments. But the fog kept rolling in, a silent, voracious tide that slowly consumed her memories, her wit, her very essence. The vibrant, storytelling woman I adored began to recede, and in her place was a frightened, confused stranger, trapped in a world that grew more alien to her with each passing day. My family was devastated. We took turns caring for her, but it was a relentless, heartbreaking struggle that exposed our every limitation. We didn't have the knowledge, the patience, the emotional fortitude. She would have moments of sheer terror, believing she was a young girl lost in a train station, or episodes of anger directed at us, her loved ones, whom she no longer recognized. We were drowning in our own grief and helplessness. Then, we were introduced to Maria. Maria was a hospice nurse, a woman whose calm, steady presence seemed to change the very pressure in the room. She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't stern or clinical. She had a warm, open face and hands that looked both strong and gentle. She didn't just dispense medication and check blood pressure. She would sit with my grandmother for hours, holding her hand, not saying a word, just being a quiet, solid presence in the storm of her confusion. She learned that my grandmother had grown up on a farm and loved the smell of fresh hay and lavender. So, Maria always kept a small sachet of lavender in her pocket. When my grandmother became agitated, convinced she was late for school and couldn't find her books, Maria didn't correct her, didn't try to force her into our reality. She would gently say, "It's all right, Alara. The teacher sent a note. School is cancelled today because of the snow. You can stay right here with me." And the panic would subside. The storm would calm. Maria saw the person, not the disease. She treated my grandmother's fading spirit with a dignity that was so profound it brought tears to my eyes. She was bearing witness. She was ensuring that my grandmother did not have to be afraid in the dark. One afternoon, I found Maria sitting at our kitchen table, her head in her hands, quietly crying. I was shocked. I had thought she was impervious to the sadness. I asked her, timidly, if she was okay. She looked up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, and gave me a small, weary smile. "It's a privilege, Sarah," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's the hardest privilege you'll ever know, but a privilege nonetheless. To be invited into someone's life at its most vulnerable, to be allowed to hold their hand as they journey into the great unknown, we bear witness. We make sure that no one has to cross that threshold alone." In that moment, something clicked into place inside my 9-year-old heart. I didn't want to be the doctor who diagnosed the illness from a distance. I wanted to be the Maria. I wanted to be the one holding the hand in the dark. I wanted to bear witness. When I was 17 and it came time to discuss college and careers, I sat my parents down at that same kitchen table. My father, a pragmatic and successful civil engineer, a man who built bridges you could see and touch, who dealt in concrete and steel and mathematical certainty, listened patiently as I laid out my plan to become a nurse. He was silent for a long time, taking off his glasses and polishing them slowly on his shirt. "A nurse, Sarah?" he finally said, his voice heavy with a disappointment that felt like a physical blow. "That's a hard life, honey. The hours are long and irregular. The pay is mediocre. And frankly," he continued, his engineer's mind seeking the most efficient, logical path, "you won't get the respect you deserve. You're a smart girl. You have a real head for science. You got your mother's compassion, but you got my brain. Be a doctor. Be a researcher. Discover something. Make a real, lasting difference. Don't settle for being the help. The help." The words hung in the air. They weren't meant to be cruel, I knew that. They were born of a father's love and a genuine, pragmatic concern for his daughter's future well-being. But they stung. They were the first time I'd felt the subtle, societal devaluation of the path I felt called to. It was a softer, more loving version of the sentiment I would later hear from Dr. Pendleton. It planted a seed of doubt. Was I being sentimental? Was I choosing a lesser path because I wasn't tough enough or smart enough for medical school? But the memory of Maria's quiet strength, of the profound dignity she brought to my grandmother's final days, was a louder, more resonant force. It was a calling, not just a career. I enrolled in a Bachelor of Science in Nursing program, and from the first day, I felt like I had come home. I loved the messy, beautiful, human intersection of hard science and profound compassion. I loved physiology and pharmacology, but I loved learning about therapeutic communication and patient-centered care just as much. I graduated at the top of my class, my head full of knowledge and my heart still full of that initial, idealistic fire. I was ready to change the world, one patient at a time. My first job was on a chaotic, understaffed medical surgical floor. It was a brutal, crushing baptism into the reality of the healthcare system. I was often responsible for 8, sometimes 10, acutely ill patients. My 12-hour shifts were a frantic, exhausting blur of passing countless medications, changing complex dressings, managing severe pain, responding to endless call lights, and documenting every single action in triplicate. I missed lunch breaks routinely. I stayed hours past my shift to finish charting. I came home with the smell of the hospital, that unique, permeating blend of antiseptic, illness, and institutional food, embedded in my skin and hair, a scent I could never quite wash away. I missed my younger brother's college graduation, my best friend's wedding, countless birthdays and holidays. The emotional cost was even higher than the physical one. I was the one who held the hand of the elderly woman dying alone because her family was across the country. I was the one who absorbed the rage and fear of the confused, post-operative patient who didn't know where he was. I learned to deliver the worst news a family could hear with a calm I did not feel, to be the steady rock in their sudden, devastating tsunami. And I learned about the hierarchy, the unspoken caste system of the hospital. I met doctors like Dr. Pendleton, who saw nurses as a necessary but fundamentally inferior cog in the great medical machine. I learned the delicate art of diplomacy, of presenting my well-founded concerns as subtle, deferential questions. Dr. Smith, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I noticed Mr. Jones's creatinine has risen sharply, and his urine output has dropped to almost nothing over the last 4 hours. I was just wondering if we might consider holding his next dose of lisinopril? I had to make them think the brilliant, life-saving idea was theirs, because to assert my own knowledge too directly was to risk being labeled difficult or emotional. It was a daily dance of performed subservience that chafed against my very soul, that made the idealistic girl who wanted to be like Maria want to scream. I began to build my walls higher and thicker, to protect that soft, inner core from the cynical, grinding reality of the system. The wall was my survival mechanism. It was during this period of profound exhaustion and disillusionment that I met Michael. He was called to our floor to fix a persistent electrical short in the nurses' station that had been plaguing us for weeks. I was having one of the worst days of my career. I'd lost a patient, a kind, funny old man named Frank who had been with us for a month. We'd grown close. He reminded me of my grandfather. His death was expected, a peaceful surrender after a long fight, but it still hollowed me out, leaving a cold, empty space inside. Minutes after pronouncing him, I had been cornered in the hallway by a brusque, impatient surgeon who berated me in front of a patient's family for a 5-minute delay in fetching him a chart. I don't have all day, nurse, he'd snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. Some of us have real work to do. The combination of grief and public humiliation was a toxic cocktail. I'd retreated to the med room, my back against the cool, humming metal of the drug dispensing machine, trying to stifle the sobs that were clawing their way up my throat. I didn't hear him come in. Rough day at the office? A quiet, calm voice asked. I jumped, whirling around, hastily swiping at the tears on my cheeks. He stood there, a heavy toolbox in one hand, wearing a simple, dark blue work shirt with Mike stitched in white thread over the pocket. He wasn't handsome in a conventional way, but he had the kindest eyes I had ever seen, the color of warm whiskey, and a quiet, solid presence that seemed to take up space without demanding it. There was a smudge of grease on his cheek. He didn't offer empty platitudes like it'll be okay or don't cry. He just looked at me, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, truly seen. Not as the nurse, not as an employee, but as a person who was profoundly hurting. He came back about 10 minutes later, after I'd pulled myself together, carrying 2 cups of truly terrible coffee from the vending machine down the hall. He handed one to me without a word. We sat on a couple of overturned supply buckets in the clean utility room, drinking the bitter, scalding liquid in a silence that was not awkward, but profoundly comfortable. He didn't need me to explain. He just shared the space with me, a quiet ally in a world that felt increasingly hostile. When I had to cancel our first proper date, a real, sit-down dinner, because of an emergency admission from the ER, I called him, fully expecting the familiar sigh of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to from others. He didn't sigh. He just said, I understand. Rain check. And then, at 2 a.m., as I was finally finishing my mountainous pile of charting, feeling utterly drained and defeated, he walked onto the unit. He wasn't allowed back there, but he'd charmed the night security guard. In his hands was a paper bag from an all-night diner. Inside were 2 greasy, perfect cheeseblers, a giant order of fries, and a thick chocolate milkshake with 2 straws. I figured you'd be hungry, he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He never saw my career as just anything. He saw the immense toll it took on me, and he admired the incredible strength it required. When I talked about my patients, he listened, really listened. He understood that my work wasn't just a job, it was a fundamental part of my identity, a vocation that demanded everything I had. He was an electrician, a man who built and fixed things with his hands, who created order from chaos, who made sure the lights turned on and the machines hummed with life. He saw that I was doing the same thing, just with people. I was trying to fix broken bodies, to bring order to physiological chaos, to be the light in someone's darkest hour. Our wedding was a small, simple affair in my parents' backyard. My father walked me down the aisle, his expression still a little uncertain, but he came. He gave me away. And when Michael and I stood facing each other, surrounded by the people we loved, we wrote our own vows. He promised to be my safe harbor, to be the calm after the storm. I promised to always come home to him, to let the walls down when I crossed our threshold. My wedding ring, that simple, perfect circle of platinum, became the ultimate symbol of that promise. It was a circle of strength, of a love that didn't diminish me but fortified me, that celebrated all of who I was. The memory of Michael, of the life and love we had built together, was a wave of palpable warmth that washed over me even as I pushed down on the cold, unresponsive chest of Arthur Pendleton. The ring on my finger was a tangible anchor to a world where I was valued, where I was cherished, where I was everything. It was the foundation that allowed me to stand here, in this room, and do my job without my past poisoning my present. "Sarah, switch out," Liam's voice commanded, pulling me back from the warmth of my memories to the cold reality of the code. Another nurse, Jenny, moved in seamlessly to take over compressions. I stepped back, my arms screaming in relief, feeling like they were made of rubber. My scrubs were plastered to my back with sweat. I looked at the monitor. The flatline was a relentless green verdict of death. The energy in the room was shifting, palpably. The frantic, hopeful effort was giving way to a grim, weary acceptance. They were going through the motions now, the life-saving dance becoming a death ritual. Dr. Evans, the attending physician, a competent and usually unflappable man, was looking at the clock on the wall, mentally calculating how long they had been at it. He was preparing to call it. To call the time of death. And then my eyes, trained over tens of thousands of hours to see the whole patient, to notice the tiny, seemingly insignificant detail that was out of place, fell on the bedside table. Next to a half-empty glass of water with a bent straw was a small, silver-framed photograph. I hadn't noticed it before, brought up from his room on the surgical floor. It was a picture of Dr. Pendleton, maybe 20 years younger, his hair a thicker, darker silver, his face unlined by the strain of his own impending mortality. He wasn't looking at the camera with his usual imperiousness, he was looking down at the woman beside him with a softness I would not have believed him capable of. She had kind eyes, a gentle, smiling mouth, and her head was tilted towards his shoulder. In front of them were two little girls, maybe 6 and 8, in matching floral dresses, their faces split with joyous, gap-toothed grins. A family. A whole, complete life, filled with love and bedtime stories and scraped knees and proud moments. He wasn't just a renowned surgeon, a proud, arrogant man who belittled nurses. He was a husband. A father. Someone was waiting for him to come home. Someone loved this man. The sight of that photograph did something to me. It was a sledgehammer blow to my clinical detachment. It reminded me of the crayon drawing taped to my refrigerator. It reminded me of Maria's words, "We bear witness." This wasn't about Arthur Pendleton and Sarah the humiliated young woman. This was about a human life, intricately and tenderly connected to other human lives. This was about a husband and a father. My personal history with him was a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast universe of this moment. My gaze swept the room again, but this time it was different. I wasn't just looking at the patient, I was looking at the entire, intricate, clinical puzzle. The 4 lines snaking into his arms, the ventilator settings, the drug vials and empty ampoules littering the code cart. My eyes, sharp and searching, scanned the 4-pole. A nearly empty, 1,000 milliliters bag of a clear solution hung there, his maintenance fluid. A standard 0.9% sodium chloride drip. But something about it nagged at the very edge of my consciousness, a ghost of a memory from a late-night study session for my critical care certification, a footnote in a dense, dry pharmacology text I had pored over. A rare, almost unheard of, idiosyncratic reaction. A 1 in a million possibility. "Stop," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the funereal silence of the room like a scalpel. Everyone looked at me. Dr. Moss, his face pale and glistening with the sweat of his futile efforts, glared, his patience gone. "We don't have time to." "His medication list," I interrupted, my voice gaining a strength and authority that came from a deep, unshakable well of knowledge. It was the voice of the expert clinician I had worked so hard to become. "He was started on that new antiarrhythmic yesterday, right? For his paroxysmal AFib. Cardioflux." Dr. Evans nodded, his impatience evident. He was a good doctor, but he was tired, and he was ready to end this. "Yes, Sarah, we know that. It's on his list." It's standard post-op prophylaxis for someone with his history. What's your point, nurse? That word. Nurse. From him, in this moment, it wasn't a diminutive. It wasn't an insult. It was my title. My identity. My power. He was deferring to my expertise. I stepped closer to the bedside, my finger pointing decisively at the bag of saline. Cardioflux. It has a known, extremely rare interaction with certain 4-fluid formulations. Specifically, the ones that use sodium metabisulfite as a preservative. It can bind to the metabisulfite and create a metabolite that causes a catastrophic, irreversible bradycardia that is completely refractory to epinephrine and atropine. It's a black box warning. It's in the literature, but it's so rare most people never see it. I leaned in, my eyes squinting at the tiny print on the label. This batch of saline. I felt a jolt of certainty, cold and clear. It's from the new supplier, MedFlow. Look. Right here. It has sodium metabisulfite listed as a preservative. A stunned, profound silence descended upon the room. It was so complete you could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the soft whoosh of the ventilator that was now breathing for an empty shell. Dr. Evans stared at me, his mind, trained for decades in differential diagnosis, racing to catch up to this left-field possibility. He stared at me, then at the bag, his expression shifting from skeptical irritation to dawning horror. He ripped the bag from the 4-pole, his eyes scanning the label. His face went from flushed to ashen. She's right, he breathed, his voice full of a stunned disbelief. My God, she's right. He looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw not just acknowledgement, but a pure, unadulterated awe. The kind of look junior residents gave him when he made a brilliant diagnosis. What's the antidote? What's the protocol? There must be one. My mind, that vast, meticulously organized library of nursing knowledge, cross-referenced and indexed by years of experience, provided the answer without a single second of hesitation. It was all there, clear as day. Atropine. But not the standard code dose. A massive, bolus dose. 5 milligrams. And we need to switch him to lactated ringers immediately, wide open. We have to flush the cardioflux metabisulfite complex out of his system and aggressively counteract the parasympathetic overdrive. It's our only shot. The room, which had been slowing to a sorrowful halt, exploded into a new, focused, and desperate frenzy of action. The atropine was drawn up, the large dose causing a few raised eyebrows, but it was pushed without question. The new bag of lactated ringers was spiked, the line opened full bore, the fluid rushing into his veins to dilute the poison. I stood back, my part in the clinical drama seemingly over. But I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on me. Just a nurse who had seen what the brilliant doctors, in their focus on the standard algorithms and the crashing vitals, had completely missed. The one who had read the fine print, who had remembered the footnote, who had connected the dots that no one else had even seen. We waited. The seconds stretched into a lifetime, each one a small eternity. The silence was heavier now, charged with a new, fragile hope. I found I was holding my breath, my own heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs, a desperate counterpoint to the deadly, unwavering flatline on the screen. I wasn't thinking about the gala, or the insult, or my own vindication. I was just looking at the man in the bed, at the photograph of his family. Come on, I thought, a silent, desperate prayer sent out into the universe. For them. For his wife. For his little girls, wherever they are now. Come back to them. And then, a miracle. A single, tentative, wobbly blip appeared on the heart monitor. It was there, and then it was gone, as if the heart itself was too frightened to beat. Then another. And another. It stuttered, it hesitated, and then, like an engine that had been flooded and was finally clearing its throat, it settled into a slow, but strong and steady, sinus rhythm. The flat line was gone. In its place was the beautiful, rhythmic spike of a life restored. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief, a sound of pure, unadulterated wonder and exhaustion, went through the room. People slumped against counters, wiping their brows. A few let out shaky, tearful laughs. He was back. We had wrestled him back from the absolute brink. The code was officially called off. The team began the slow, meticulous process of cleaning up the battlefield, discarding used syringes, picking up wrappers, checking and rechecking all his lines, securing his airway properly. The mood was one of exhausted, shell-shocked triumph. Dr. Evans came over to me, his hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "Sarah, that was—" I have no words. That was the most incredible piece of clinical detective work I have ever seen in my entire career. You saved his life. Flat out. I've been practicing for 35 years, and I've never even heard of that interaction. I doubt I would have ever thought of it. You are a phenomenal nurse. I just nodded, suddenly so drained I could have folded in on myself right there on the floor. The adrenaline was receding, leaving a strange, hollow, yet profoundly peaceful feeling in its wake. The anger was gone. The old, festering hurt had been cauterized, sealed shut by the white-hot fire of the crisis. It was over. I helped the team transfer the now-stable Dr. Pendleton to the fully monitored ICU bed, my movements automatic, practiced, a comforting routine in the aftermath of the storm. I was setting up the new infusion pumps, checking his arterial line waveform, when I heard a weak, gurgling rasp from the bed. His eyes were open. They were clouded with the thick confusion of sedation and the profound trauma of what his body had just endured, but they were focused, blearily, on me. He tried to speak, his throat raw and bruised from the intubation tube that had just been removed. I leaned in closer, my ear near his mouth, catching the faint, painful whisper of air. "The nurse," he rasped, each word an effort. "From the code." I nodded, gently adjusting his oxygen mask to ensure a better fit. "Yes, Dr. Pendleton. I'm Sarah. You're in the ICU. You're going to be okay. You're stable now." My voice was soft, professional, devoid of any personal history. It was the voice I used with all my patients, a voice designed to comfort and reassure. He blinked slowly, his gaze clearing a little as the sedatives continued to wear off. He was looking at my face, really looking, his eyes tracing the lines of my features. And then, a flicker of something else in his eyes. Not quite recognition, not yet. But a dawning, profound confusion. A memory, perhaps, scratching at the edges of his drug-hazed consciousness. He had been in a deep, dark, silent place, and a voice had cut through the nothingness, a calm, authoritative, female voice that had given a command that pulled him back. A nurse's voice. His eyes, those cool, assessing blue eyes that had once looked straight through me as if I were a piece of furniture, now held a different light. They were filled with a vulnerability I had never seen in him before, a raw, unguarded humanity. They were the eyes of a patient, utterly dependent and terrified, not the eyes of a god. He closed them again, as if the effort of keeping them open was too much, and a single tear escaped, tracing a slow, clean path through the stubble and grime on his cheek. His hand, limp and heavy on the stiff white hospital sheet, twitched. An almost imperceptible movement, a feeble, aborted attempt to lift it, perhaps to gesture, to reach out, to communicate something for which words were still too distant. I didn't need a thank you. I didn't need a grand, dramatic apology delivered on his knees. That single tear, that tiny, helpless movement of his hand, was everything. It was more eloquent than any speech could ever be. It was the final, solid brick in the wall I had spent my entire career building, but it was also the thing that made the wall utterly transparent, unnecessary. His profound, naked vulnerability had met my unshakable strength and expertise, and in that meeting, on that level, human being to human being, all the old hierarchies, all the old insults, had simply dissolved. They were meaningless, weightless things, blown away like dust in a hurricane. I finished my tasks in a quiet, reflective silence, the steady, reassuring beep of his heart monitor a gentle, rhythmic lullaby in the background, a sound that signified life, victory, and a second chance. I looked at him one last time before I left the room to document the monumental event, my pen poised to record the most extraordinary code of my career. He was just a man. Frightened, broken, vulnerable. And I was just a nurse. Knowledgeable, strong, compassionate. But in that equation, the word just had lost all its power, all its diminutive force. It was an empty syllable. It meant nothing. I walked out of the room and back onto the unit. The lights were still bright, the sounds were still familiar, the hiss of oxygen, the beeping of monitors, the soft, shuffling footsteps of the night staff. Another call light was blinking, a soft, persistent red eye. Another family member was standing at the nurse's station, their face a mask of worry and exhaustion, looking to me for answers, for comfort, for a sliver of hope. This was my world. This messy, heartbreaking, beautiful, and profoundly human world. This was my legacy. It wasn't built on the praise of powerful men or the defeat of old ghosts. It was built in the quiet, unseen hours of the night shift. It was built on 1,000 small, uncelebrated acts of courage and compassion, the bed bath given with tenderness to a patient who can no longer thank you, the extra moment taken to hold the hand of a dying person so they wouldn't be alone, the careful, patient explanation given for the 10th time to a confused elderly man. It was built on the deep, abiding knowledge that lives not just in my brain, but in my hands and my heart. It was in the quiet, unshakable confidence of knowing that when a life hangs in the balance, suspended between this world and the next, it is often just a nurse who holds the other end of the rope, her feet planted firmly on the ground, her hands sure and strong, refusing to let go. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of the code, of the obscure drug interaction I had identified, spread through the hospital like wildfire. I was stopped in the hallways by doctors and nurses I barely knew, who wanted to shake my hand, to hear the story from my own mouth. There was a formal review, and the hospital immediately changed its fluid supplier for all patients on CardioFlux, a policy change that bore my fingerprints, a silent testament to the impact of a nurse's vigilance. Dr. Pendleton recovered slowly. He was transferred out of the ICU after a week but undeniably alive. I was not his primary nurse after that first night. It felt better, for both of us, I think, to maintain that distance. But one afternoon, as I was walking past the step-down unit, I saw him sitting in a chair by the window, his wife reading to him from a book. He saw me through the open door. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But he gave me a slow, deliberate, and deeply respectful nod. It was a gesture between colleagues. Between equals. It was all the acknowledgement I would ever need. A month later, a letter arrived at the hospital, addressed to me. The handwriting was precise, elegant. It was from Dr. Pendleton. Dear Ms. Evans, it began. He used my name, my title. I have spent many weeks attempting to find the words to express my gratitude, and I find them all inadequate. You saved my life. This is a simple, medical fact. But you did more than that. You offered me a lesson in humility and a masterclass in clinical excellence that I, in my long career, had failed to fully appreciate. I am told that you identified a drug interaction so rare that none of the physicians present were aware of it. This is a testament to your profound knowledge and dedication to your profession. I have reflected often on the circumstance that placed my life in your hands, and it has forced me to confront my own past attitudes and behaviors. I fear I have, on many occasions, been guilty of the very arrogance you so notably lacked during my moment of greatest need. For any past disrespect, whether direct or indirect, I offer my most sincere and heartfelt apology. It was undeserved, and it was wrong. Please know that I will carry the debt of my life, and the lesson you taught me, for the remainder of my days. You are a credit to your profession, and you have my deepest respect. Sincerely, Dr. Arthur Pendleton. I read the letter once, then folded it carefully and put it in my locker. I didn't need to keep it. The words were already etched onto my soul. The circle was complete. The ghost was laid to rest. That evening, I drove home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I walked into my house, and the warm, familiar scent of home washed over me. Lily came barreling into my legs, chattering about her day. Michael was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. He looked up and smiled, and I felt the last of the hospital's chill melt away. I had done my job. I had borne witness. I had made a difference. And now, I was home. As I lifted Lily into my arms, burying my face in her sweet-smelling hair, I understood the true, complete, and enduring moral of my story, a truth that had been tested in fire and confirmed in grace, a truth I would carry with me always. They call us just nurses, until the day the monitors scream and the algorithms fail, and life itself is balanced on a knife's edge. They call us just nurses, until the moment they are lying helpless, and the only thing standing between them and the end is our knowledge, our skill, and our unwavering will to fight. And on that day, in that moment, we are not just anything. We are everything.